Welcome. In this video, you are going to learn about Habermas' essay, Modernity, an Incomplete Project. The problem with Habermas is that he is a social scientist, and as far as a literature student, it is very difficult to understand his concept. So, I have simplified it for the literature student who are preparing for competitive exams like HSST English, Assistant Professor of English, like that. If you watch this video till the end, you will be getting a very good understanding. I have divided the class into 5 parts. In the first part, we will locate Habermas. I'm not going to speak about his Wikipedia. I'm going to locate Habermas. Secondly, I'll give you an introduction to the essay. Third, what is the central argument? That an essay is always centered around a central argument. So what is it? Once you know, it's like a backbone. Once you know, you can write the exam very well. Then we will go to a detailed summary about Habermas' essay. And finally, we will have some short questions, some 10 questions that I found that may be asked from this essay. Before that, I want to really thank you for being here with me and watching my classes and learning from me. If you don't know me, if you are here the first time, hi, I am Pradeep Hariharan. I am an assistant professor of English, and my mission is to help you score high marks in the exam. The first thing we have to know about Habermas is that he belongs to the Frankfurt School of Cultural Studies. As you know, Frankfurt School was the first school to study culture in a systematic manner, followed with Birmingham School. So, one of the things you need to understand is that these scholars like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Walter Benjamin, followed by Habermas, they were all what you may call steeped in the Marxist tradition. Marxist, not in the revolutionary manner, they stood for universal equality, universal justice, and universal rights, because most of them were Jewish in their religion. So that is the first thing you need to understand about that. And his first work, The Structural Transformation of Public Sphere, an inquiry into category of bourgeois society, was published in 1962. So one of the words that are associated with Habermas is public sphere, that was asked for the previous HSST exam. So now we move on to the second part, what this essay is all about. Remember, we need to understand the context of modernity and postmodernity. These are two visions of social transformation. That is how social transformation. That is how the society changes. And Modernity and Incomplete Project, it was given as a talk in 1980 when he won Theodor Adorno Prize. And in 1981, it was given as a lecture in New York Institute. To be honest, nobody is going to ask you when it was published because it is given in German and translated into English. So those areas, as you know, are not sure. Nobody is going to ask you who is the official translator because such questions are what you may call ambiguous. And finally, important point is that the essay is divided into 5 subheadings. And what are they? The first one is the discipline of aesthetic modernity. Second one, cultural modernity and societal modernization. Third one, the project of enlightenment. The false program of negation of culture and alternative. So one word that will repeatedly come again and again in this essay will be modernity or modernism. So if you closely look at the subtitles, you can see that he speaks about 3 types of modernism. First one is the aesthetic modernism. It moves on to the cultural modernity or cultural modernism and towards a societal modernization. And finally, it ends up in post-structuralism or post-modernism, which is a different kind. So that is how I have designed this lecture, how he traces the different types of modernism. Now we move on to the central argument of this essay. What is the central argument? That is what we are going to discuss. The title itself is self-explanatory. Modernity, an Incomplete Project. That is, Habermas believes that modernism has not yet fulfilled its promises. So we have to correct modernism before we jump into another concept known as postmodernity. So what is modernism for Habermas, which is very important? Actually, he believes modernism as a self-actualization, self-realization, and liberal and universal rights, and democracy, economic justice. So those are the 3 promises of modernism. What is democracy? Then equality for all, and justice before law. So these are the three promises of modernism. And more importantly, modernism gives a lot of importance to our self-realization, and it asks for a demand for an authentic self. You understand that the science grew a lot at the time of modernism and for self-expression. So the three cornerstones of modernism is that self-realization, demand for authentic self, and expression. Beyond that, it gives another most important point is that this talk or lecture is not given for a literature students or literary context. It is given in the context of politics. Towards the end, Habermas says that there is a change in politics, especially in Germany, and that politics is attacking those who people with individuality and identity. So, with that context, we move on to the detailed summary of the essay. I hope I am making sense to you. If I am really making sense to you, please give me a thumbs up so that I know that I am teaching you well. Okay, now we move into the detailed summary of this essay. Remember, as I told you in the beginning, I am not going in the order written by Habermas because it will take me 5 or 6 hours to do the lecture. In order to compress, I have squeezed the juice out of this essay, and I am presenting you with the most important points so that you can understand it. Remember, the word that I will repeat again and again will be modernism and modernity. So, in the first, he speaks about 6 points as an introduction to modernism. He says that every society or every generation separates themselves, calls themselves modern, and separates themselves from the previous generation, as previous generation is called old and their generation is modern. And he says it has a long history. The first time the word modern was used in the 5th century by a writer known as Hans Robert Joss. He has, not that writer, he has studied modernism. That writer comes in the essay, and it was Christians who started to use the word modern to separate from the pagans and called themselves as modernism. Then we go on to the concept of what do we mean by aesthetic modernity. 6 points, he says. I found 6 points. The first thing is that aesthetic modernity, remember, when we speak about modernism, we are speaking about the modernism of the society, not modernism as a movement in literature. Okay, we have studied modernism as a movement in literature starting with Eliot and all. He is not saying that. He is speaking in general about modernism as a society. So he says that modernism supports self-realization. That is a separation from the fate. Before that, there was a stress is given on fate. With modernism, it started to believe in self-realization, the power in man, and demand for authentic self. You have to be authentic and self-expression. And second thing is that modernism strongly believes that art and science would promote our understanding of the self, and it will help us to progress. And aesthetic modernity, he says, found its best expression in Charles Baudelaire's work, and modernity lost it ended in the climax with surrealism. Okay, actually with surrealism, he says that art separated itself from the real life things, and aesthetic modernity, he says, earlier was expressed through 2 areas. One is through religion and metaphysics, and moreover, up to aesthetic modernism, literature was rooted in real life situation, and it wanted man's progress. That is, in general, he is speaking about humanism and the principles of humanism in aesthetic modernity. Then he says it started to change. He is not giving when it started to change. I have put in layman's words, cultural modernism is judging a culture based on its economy than values. I'll give you an example outside the essay. For example, whom will you call a cultural person, an African or an American? Immediately to your mind, an American comes. Why? Because they have got money. But if you have studied African writers, you understand that they have got many more values than an American. When you study Orientalism, you understand that we have got many more values than the West. But when you use the word culture, in cultural modernism, we judge a society based on the economy, the money they have. That is what Habermas says. So, from self-realization, from values, from progress, suddenly modernism started to change, where the importance is given to money than personal values. So he speaks about 6 points about cultural modernism. He says it gives importance to economic and administrative aspect. So in modernism you have the freedom, liberalism, but when it comes to cultural modernism, the government starts to control you. It limits liberalism and establishes discipline. So for cultural modernism, the values of aesthetic modernism is a threat. Okay, this is done to support new capitalist economies. You know that in modern new capitalist economies, it wants people to work like ants, A-N-T-S. Okay, if it does not want people to think and reflect, they want workforce. Okay, how this is done? This is done by connecting modernism with extremism. He says in cultural modernism, it will give examples like modernism leads to nihilism, government regulation. If there is no government regulation, it will lead to totalitarianism. If women's liberation is not given, it will lead to homosexual rights. So ultimately, connecting something with the extreme, it attacks the aesthetic modernism. And what happens is that this cultural modernism gives more importance to capitalism than intellectual and modern values. So he's tracing how aesthetic modernism, which was the pinnacle of values, started to deteriorate into cultural modernism, where the stress goes to money. Now we move on to the third one, which is known as the societal modernization, in which he says that the government establishes more power. I told you this essay is written in the context of politics, not literature. Here, the only focus is on the organizational accomplishment of the state. The state starts to celebrate its power by controlling people. Are you getting some sense, dears? So that is what he is saying. And he says this is against the principles of... So far you understood that he is tracing how modernism or modernity degraded. Now we move on to the promise of Project Enlightenment. You know, with Enlightenment, modernism started in the early stage. So he says that modern art is always connected with modernity is always connected with the European art. And before that, that is the societal modernization happened, art, or what you may call, why do we study art? For self-realization and to make us a better person. It was connected with religion and metaphysics. But somewhere, religion and metaphysics got separated into three different unities, which he calls as science, morality, and art. And science, morality, and art, in other words, he uses the word knowledge, justice, and morality. And they started to get institutionalized. And when these got institutionalized, experts started to speak about science, they started to speak about justice, and they started to speak about art. What happened was, it separated from people's realities and real life problems. And he says it started with arts for art's sake in the 19th century. When art aesthetic project, that is why the first word he speaks about aesthetic modernity. When art started to speak for art's sake, he says that it was good. At later stage, what happened was artists started to express themselves more, separating from the common feelings of the people. That ended with surrealism. And another change what happened was art, instead of being authentic, it started to express in new techniques and production, media of production and techniques. That is what we study in culture studies. So the word aura and all associated with art started to be produced for the mass audience. When it is produced for the mass audience, it becomes a kind of a mechanical production. It loses its value. And more importantly, it moves away from reality. You have watched the reality shows. What reality is there? Is it connected to our reality? No. So the word reality in reality show and our realities are totally different. So he says this was happened in modernism towards the end. Art separated from man's real life problems. So he says that this started with arts for art's sake and ended with surrealism. Instead of divorcing modernity, he says that we have to correct modernism, and alternative, he says that we have to learn from the mistake. And he says that Project Modernity has not fulfilled, but we should not go back to tradition. It will impoverish it. That is what he says. And at the same time, the point is that he says we have to connect with the live world. Yes, now we come to the last part of the essay where he critiques about postmodernism by calling names of Michel Foucault, Derrida and all. He says there are three types of anti-modern people. Actually, he doesn't use the word postmodernism. He calls them anti-modern. And the first one is young conservatives. Conservatives. These people are George Bataille to Michel Foucault. They take us to the archaic sphere. And the another one is neo-Aristotelians. These people are saddened with modernity and ask us to go just pre-modern state. And third one are neo-conservatives. These people welcome technological progress, capitalist growth and rational administration, and they look at art as an utopian content and politics with moral practical justification. That is, they say politics means to control over people. It has to got no moral values. And he says that, concludes the essay by saying that anti-modernity trend is more visible in politics, especially in Germany. It started to abuse intellectualism. It has started to attack people who has got self-values. So they want all of us to fall in line and work for this capitalist society. Now we comes to the last part of the essay. If you have stayed till the end, I really congratulate you. You are a deep learner, a very studious student. I'm proud of you. Now we go on to some questions which I pulled out while preparing for, so that you can answer this objective exam. According to Habermas, postmodernity definitely presents itself as anti-modernity. I said he used the word anti-modernity, he never used the word postmodernity. And who investigated the modern? It's Hans Robert Joss. Remember, dears, don't study it by heart. This is just to get familiarity. Okay, be familiar with it. Then aesthetic modernity. I'm sorry, A is typing error. Aesthetic modernity and clear. It reaches in the works of Baudelaire. I'm sorry, there are some typing errors in that. Modernity reached its climax in the works of, it is Café Voltaire. If they ask you what is the modernity reached its climax, and what is the term Walter Benjamin uses for its concept of the present. It is a German word. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Jetztzeit, J-E-T-Z, T-Z-E-I-T. Sometimes they may ask you, it is from the text. Who said we are experiencing the end of the idea of modern art? That is from the essay Octavia Paz. Who is the American neoconservative referred by Habermas? That is Daniel Bell. Who is the famous culture theorist mentioned in the essay? It is Theodor Adorno. Who is the German dramatist and historian mentioned by Habermas? It is Friedrich von Schiller. What is the word used by Habermas to attack the postmodernist? He used the word terrorist. And how does Habermas view Brecht's and Walter Benjamin's interest in art? He calls as surrealist revolt. So these are some of the extra points that I found. So dear, thank you very much for watching till the end. If you really enjoyed this content, I request you, there is a special link to join my Facebook group where I nurture the future teachers. If you're interested, you can join. Otherwise, I'll see you in another video. Bye-bye.